I got bit by the culture bug pretty fast when I got to work there, and I got to see, holy cow, everybody literally loves their job. Like, this place is full of amazing people that like each other. And like, everybody says, thank God it's Monday instead of thank God it's Friday here.
Hey, welcome to 10X Your Team with Cam and Otis. We're a father-son leadership podcast where we talk with other lifelong learners about making an impact and solving big problems. And folks, those of you who are longtime listeners know that I've been dealing with some physical issues and unable to do some things that I felt were very important to me at the ranch. And I got a couple of them things done. Which, if you know what owning a ranch is like, that just means it's on to the next thing.
How many times I said it on the show? There's always work to be done on the farm, right?
There is. Oh, yep. It's a fence is next, and that's yeah. Man, so folks, if you want to build a fence at a ranch, here is your call to action right now. Just go to tribe-purpose.com and click that contact Otis button, and I'll get you on the schedule to help me build that fence. I'm always willing to have a helping hand on the farm, right?
Oh, yeah. Got to drive some T-posts in.
Yeah. I mean, Brett, our good friend Brett joining us today. Brett, you ever driven in a T-post with a post driver?
I can't say I'd be much help. City guy here, so.
Yeah.
You'd be a great supervisor.
Yeah.
They probably draw us a plan for it with that engineering background you got, right?
Yeah, I've got one of those, manual pole digging things I got at a garage sale, but I've never used it. So,
is the wood handle rotten on it?
It looks okay, but I haven't tried it yet.
Oh man! Well, you got the motion right with a T-post driver. It's a steel pipe that has a cap on the end and handles. And it's whang, and that's pretty much what it sounds like until you get that post in the ground.
Yeah, that's a weird day on the ears. Spending a full day driving T-posts. It's a weird one.
It's an experience I think that everybody should have at least once in their lifetime. So, Brett, I'll add you to that list of people coming down to the ranch to help out. How's that?
This sounds like a riot, fellas. This sounds all right.
Did you have something else, Cam, to some other smart ass?
No, I was just going to say, it's freaking loud. So maybe everybody after your ears have fully, I don't know, get some ear protection out there or something.
Well, it is satisfying. I mean, if you just imagine what a 10-pound sledge sounds like hitting an anvil, that's what a post driver sounds like.
Oh yeah, much more satisfying. You swinging a pickaxe in the dirt. You don't get nothing out of that. It doesn't sound good. Doesn't look cool. You just sweating out in the sun. Yeah, it's no fun.
Yeah. Well, now that
the T-post is kind of like it's like doing like a power clean. It's like everyone hears the weight going around. It's like that guy's really working over there.
Yep. There's that sound feedback, kind of like shooting steel out at the range. Now that we've established, though, that Brett's a city boy, he is an engineer, all joking aside. And Brett, are you an engineer like I'm an engineer? Like you got the piece of paper hanging on the wall and that's about it? Or do you still have some of them skill sets?
No, that's about it. Yeah, part of the work I do now, I often end up telling a story about kind of how I got out of the engineering world. So yeah, I was a civil engineer. So you think I ought to know something about it, driving a post into the ground, but never spent a lot of time doing it.
Yeah, that's for the fellows down on the roadside. That ain't for the civil engineer designing the road, is it? Mm-hmm. So, and you touched on exactly what I wanted to ask you. Kicking us off was how did you go from hardcore? You punch in the number, you get the solution, you use this formula to that formula, and problem solved as an engineer. To culture, because culture is touchy-feely. You can't put it into a formula to get an answer. How the heck did that shift happen?
Well, the short story is I realized it mattered a lot more the type of company I worked for as far as my quality of life and what was rewarding to me. It mattered a lot more the type of company that I worked for and who I worked with than specifically what I was doing. So, I was an engineer for a few years. Ended up getting a job at a real small company, entrepreneurial company. The owner kept me interested for 2 or 3 years before I just said, he tried to promote me and tried to give me more responsibility. And there's a long story, but I told him before he even hired me, I told him I didn't want to be an engineer, and he still talked me into taking a job. So it was
were you that kid in college that you got like halfway through and you went, oh, I don't want to do this, but
that was
you
me.
had to just get it done?
That was me. Went to the business school office, said, hey, I want to change my major. They said, great, but what are you going to do with all those extra science credits? So it would have been a whole nother year of school to switch. So I just finished,
How'd you start carving out that path then to go do something non-engineer? Because I think that's, I think there's, it's the sadder stories, of course, but as much as we're joking, I'm sure there's folks out there who then are just checking that box as the engineer. Kind of, we joke about the gold watch type generation. Dad, there's like, well, I'll just do this. I get the gold watch and I'm done. And I got my house. I guess I'm happy.
Yeah. Well, not one of my brighter moments, but my father had started a nonprofit organization in the Omaha area. I'm from Omaha, Nebraska. And he had really been all in on company culture from day one and had been running this organization that had been voted over and over again as the #1 best place to work in the entire city. I was off at school, learning to be an engineer, not paying a whole lot of attention. But it wasn't until I got my first sort of real world job after college and wasn't loving it that I started thinking, what do I actually want to do? What do I, what's the right career path for me? And I went through a couple of years of trying to figure that out and not being real inspired. And it was during that time, somebody that worked with my father, he of course never give much advice. And he was pretty hands off on these kinds of things and never pressured me to do one thing or the other. But somebody that was one of his vice presidents was nice enough to take me to lunch and just talk about my career. And she listened to me complaining and not sure what I wanted to do. And she leaned forward and she said, Brett, you do know that's why your dad focuses so much on culture, right? And I was probably 23 or something. I said, what do you mean? And that was sort of, I never really got it until I had lived that experience and said, I didn't love my job, didn't love what I was doing. And she said, that's why we focus so much on building a great place to work. And I said, tell me more. And from that moment forward, I really realized the type of company you work for and the culture that exists is hugely important in quality of life.
So how did you pick your path out from that? Because I always think it's interesting when people have those moments that, that moment of enlightenment where it's like, okay, hey, here's what I want to do. Here's the life I want to live, all that. It's like, well, you could go be happy, turning screws for the company that is the perfect culture and all of that. You could go start coaching, consulting. You could start your own company. There's all sorts of different paths there. How did you pick the right one for you?
Well, I stumbled into it. That organization is called QLI. They're a specialty healthcare company. So they did brain and spinal cord injury rehabilitation. Okay. The healthcare space. I knew the company just from growing up, but I really had never been inside of it. And they had a fundraising position open and I was a CEO's kid and it seemed like maybe a fit. And so they were nice enough to give me that job eventually after I decided to apply for it. And that was the best decision I ever made. So, I was able to do a variety of different things inside of that business over almost 15 years, from fundraising to marketing to sales and business development to insurance and payer relations and a lot of different things that hopefully added value to that business. But I got bit by the culture bug pretty fast when I got to work there and I got to see, holy cow, everybody literally loves their job. Like this place is full of amazing people that like each other. And like everybody says, thank God it's Monday instead of thank God it's Friday here. And what's that, and so I just loved it. And so ever since then, I've sort of been on a mission to help other people and other organizations figure this out.
What was the, back to the engineer, what was the formula? I mean, because, even though you don't like being an engineer, you had to have some of that, put things into a formula to get the answer. What created that culture at QLI that made it so awesome that everybody wanted to be there on Monday?
Well, that's a big question. And that's really what I do now with BetterCulture. And you'd think I'd have like a very simple answer, but there's a lot. At its simplest form, great organizations and healthy cultures have clarity of thought on what it means to be a leader and what it means to be a follower. So, most organizations, if you go ask executives, what does it mean to be a leader inside of this company? Aside from, managing your P&L and getting projects out the door, what are you trying to accomplish with your people? Is there some overriding philosophy? Most executive teams, if I interview one person after the other, they all say something different, right? They don't have clarity of thought on what it means to be a leader in a system. And so, starting from what QLI literally used over 30 years ago were these 7 principles of leadership. And there's a whole backstory on those that I won't go into unless you really want me to. But these 7 principles for what it means to be a leader, when we started doing consulting on the outside, we didn't think our 7 principles, we didn't assume they were the right ones that had built this 5-time best place to work. So our first few clients, we said, you don't have to use our principles, but you got to have principles. And we would help organizations figure out what their leadership principles should be. And we inevitably would get to the end of that process and they'd say, we kind of like what you guys had. Those 7 over there are better than this, this process we led. And so we kind of quit trying to figure out new principles and we just teach those now. So that's what it means to be a leader from the top down. And then from the bottom up, what are the attitudes and behaviors that you want to expect from everybody on a day in, day out basis? Getting clarity on those things, helping people understand that's what culture is, and encouraging people to do more of what you're looking for, what would be ideal, what's in their interest, what's in the team's interest, what's in the company's interest every day. If you do those 2 things consistently over time, you have an amazing culture.
Go ahead, Dad. I see you got one.
Yeah, I do. Because the other thing that always comes up, and still a little bit of an engineer, but more in the business sense, is, well, how do I measure that? How do I measure that, Brett? How do I measure that Bob is happy and Sally is happy, or they're not? And how do I know, as the guy?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you know this, but we do culture surveys. So that's part of our business. So we will measure the health of a culture and give you a really detailed breakdown. And that's you can use, there are a variety of employee engagement surveys. There are a lot of them out there on the market, and that can work for big companies or usually if you're a team of, 20 or less, you probably don't need a survey to really have a sense of how people like their jobs. But there are lots of tools out there. Our BetterCulture survey is amazing. We typically use it with organizations that are between 50 and 1,000 employees is the right size for what we do. But you want to ask people questions and let them give anonymous feedback about how they feel about their team, their manager, their company. And, you can either do that real simple, like a net promoter score type thing. Would you recommend this as a good place to work? Just ask one question and gather that data, and you get some sense of, do people like their job? Or you can go a much more detailed approach like our survey and get a lot of data. I don't know. Is that what you're expecting? What do you think about
it's, you're 100% right on the different ways of measuring it. And I'm also thinking of the problem you have, because I have a client who they did the 360 thing. And because they were a small company at the headquarters, they had a bunch of people offsite, several hundred offsite, but the headquarters folks, they knew who was saying what. So the anonymity, and I always find it ironic, and I think everybody knew there was no anonymity in their comments. So they also were willing, some of them were willing to, poke you in the chest or poke that leader in the chest, sort of thing. Yeah. What do you do about that?
So Otis, we don't do a lot of 360s. And part of that's because we're not primarily a coaching company. I mean, I think 360s tend to have the most value when you're building a trusting relationship as a consultant or a coach with someone that you're going to help them work through feedback, set some growth things, push them to make progress. And we do that some, but I'll tell you the other reason we don't do a lot of 360s is because I don't recommend them with executive groups where the culture isn't already pretty healthy. If there's a lot of sharp elbows, if people, if there's going to be a lot of sort of feedback that people could take offense to, a little bit of that is okay, especially if relationships are pretty good. But a lot of that, especially when relationships are not good, I find very counterproductive. And so I think some organizations wade into the 360 space because that's what they think they should do to get feedback. And it is possible to do more damage than good with those instruments.
What that brings to mind for me is actually something we talked about, I guess, more in the self leadership space of the like, well, how often should you be asking yourself, am I happy? And it's like you get up every morning and start going, am I happy? Am I happy? And then you start to notice all the negative things that are wrong there. And I can see a similar kind of effect there, Brett. Of it's like, yeah, no, if things aren't great and you start going, well, how is my culture good? Then you start noticing all those negative things and you kind of create that spiral there. Could you talk some about the maybe the pacing aspect of that, or a secondary intervention to help to prevent that kind of a spiral?
Yeah. So, when I'm working with an organization, first off, if they tell me, yes, they understand why culture matters to their business, that's step one is, we work with very few companies that I have to talk them into, you should invest in this, right? So assuming they already believe that culture matters, then what I'm going to typically suggest, and companies do this, there's never one way to do anything. What we suggest is that you measure the health of your culture, which essentially means you're asking all the employees how they feel about their company via our survey tool. We suggest once every year, once every 18 months, or once every 2 years. I don't actually want data more often than that. I just want good data, at least once a year, once every 18 months if there's seasonality in your business, or every 2 years even if you don't want to mess with it too often. That gives me 2 or 3 things to work on steadily and consistently, right? And then we check again. And that's our approach is really more of a slow and steady, a long-term, let's drive continuous improvement, but let's not try to pack 16 initiatives into this quarter approach. And what we find is if an organization will go through that process and stretch it out, let's say it's a 3-year process and you do a survey at the front, you do it 18 months and you do it 3 years in. And if you've been trying to do a few things consistently over time to get better during that 3-year period, you're going to show good progress. So that's, we try to really advise people to not look at all the feedback and not try to do everything at once. It gets overwhelming.
Yeah, because then you're measuring off of like I'm almost thinking like the daily scorecards like we talked about with folks before, Dad. It's like your daily scorecards on that. Then if you start adjusting off of those daily scores, then now it's just like the boss who comes into the marketing and goes, I want to do everything on Google. Actually, I read last night that Facebook's the next hotspot. Let's switch to Facebook. Actually, TikTok's still here. We gotta go to TikTok, and it becomes this. You're chasing rabbits. Just like people picture that. I think people see that in marketing and those type of traps a little bit as a leader. I think people miss that in the cultural aspect, that it's like you need to be consistent there and stretch that over the long term, because if you're chasing those individual rabbits every single day, then you're going to screw up everyone in the team. They're going to be confused.
Yeah. And I think every part of the organization can have a couple goals, right? So when we're doing strategic planning around culture, we will, by the way, I'm totally victim to the marketing stuff like you're talking about, Camden. I'm the person that comes into my office.
We're so excitable as leaders, man. It's hard.
Exactly. It's like, hey, what do you think about this? And my team's like, didn't we just agree last week? This was the plan. So, but when it comes to
Tribe
culture,
and Purpose never does that at all. I have a very consistent workflow from my boss. Yes.
Yeah. But, I like to think of an organization, and, I think the executive team should have a couple things they're working on. I think the HR and operations team, if you're a good sized business, like they should have a few things they're trying to tighten up as far as things that are going to impact culture. I think leaders and managers throughout a system should have a few things that they're all working on, and so by the time everybody gets a couple things, it actually adds up to quite a few things that can make progress again, slowly over time.
Yeah, that reminds me, and don't ask me to do the public math on this, but I think it was Tony Robbins, Business Mastery, was talking about 30xing your company, and it wasn't like you were 30xing the revenue. It was you're doing 10% here, 5% there, and this and this, and then it all adds up.
Yes.
So, and that's exactly what you're describing. If you've got a little bit over here that makes those little bits can make a big change to an organization, can't they?
Otis, Yeah. Cam, you got something on that?
Oh, I was just going to say, and this is probably teeing you up, Brett, but it gives the small team leadership potential there. Hey, yeah, we're all working on these kind of things, but my group right here, us three, I know what I'm working on, and then we get to take ownership over that, and that creates that layered leadership, which is really effective to hold that culture.
Yeah, this is actually an idea that I'm playing with right now, trying to figure out how to more effectively communicate it in a speech or in a, just because what I'm seeing is exactly what you described, Otis, is I think it might be the only way that organizations make significant progress is by doing lots of little things.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, I can find very few examples of organizations that have made tremendous progress and built these amazing cultures where they said, oh yeah, it's all because of a couple things. It's like, no, we're looking for all kinds of little wins and they add up to big progress. Right. And so I think there's a lot of truth to that, the only way to run a marathon is one step at a time. And if you think you're just going to do a couple things, but they're going to be perfect and they're going to get huge outcome, I think you're probably missing. When it comes to culture, it's a daily thing. It's what did you do to make it better for your team today? And if you're not working on something to build appreciation or build pride or, deal with conflict or help people grow or whatever it is on a regular basis, I think those are the organizations that aren't going to make much progress.
And I think for leaders out there who might be looking at their business of like trying to make that big dramatic change, that that surgical intervention, those kind of things, there is a possibility for that. But the comparison that comes to mind, to take it back to again that like self leadership level, it's like you're having problems in your life and you go screw off to Thailand for a couple of weeks, you come back, the problems are still there, the culture is still not great. Like all those same things, you're going to fall right back into those same habits. And it's about coming up with those slight changes so you can actually sustain them rather than trying to make it so dramatic in the first place. Mm-hmm. There's a piece there that I think is really interesting. Dad, you talked about this in a masterclass a couple months ago talking about culture, but I think there's an interesting thing around culture where there's this like rah level of culture of it's like we're all doing this and we're cheering and it's all this and it's constant. And there's a value there. There's a mechanism behind that it's like by me saying the values every morning over the intercom, we all are learning the values and those kind of things. There's also this like weird, I don't know if it's just like feels like nerdy or what, but there's this weird off-putting thing to that as well. It's like, all right, chill out, Brett. We get it. Yeah, we're all on the same page. We read your email last night. We read your email this morning. We don't need to talk about this right now. Like there's this weird dichotomy there a little bit. What are your thoughts, Brett, on trying to find that like happy medium where, you are pumping out the rah stuff occasionally, making sure everyone's on the same page, but you're also not the guy screaming from the rooftops constantly and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So I don't know who all listens to your podcast and what that looks like, but I'm gonna try something. I'm gonna go out on a limb here. All right. So I have clients that are in particular some of the heavier industries, whether that's construction or whether that's industrial, et cetera. And when I run meetings for them, I just never been in this culture myself. They start every meeting with a safety briefing, right? I'm sure you guys have had that experience. Maybe some of you work for employers that really prioritize safety. And before we can talk about what's on like the actual agenda, we have to know where the fire escapes are and who's going to call 911 and where there's a defibrillator and like all that stuff. And, this has become commonplace in a lot of large businesses as a risk management practice, et cetera.
See the big billboard that says, 400 days since the last injury or whatever. Yeah.
And I'll just be honest. The first time I was exposed to this, I was like, what are we doing here? Like you guys, are you that worried something's going to happen? I mean, there's 12 of us here. Like, can't we just, and then it happened again and it happened again. And actually I have come to understand the value of that as a process and as part of the culture, et cetera. And I think the message sinks in that this company cares about your safety and they want to keep having, all these things. And so even though it takes some time, and I think you could argue about whether or not it's the perfect way to spend time in every instance, but it becomes part of the culture and it delivers value for the business in an area that they're trying to focus on. And I think culture can be the same way. So a couple caveats. I do think you should vary it up. I do think you should not be reading a script. And most importantly, I think it's got to be genuine, right? I think people can feel if you're going through emotion or if you're genuine. But like a great practice is let's start every team meeting by recognizing somebody in the meeting for something awesome they've done in the last week. Now, that's going to be different every week, hopefully. It should feel genuine and it should feel good. And by the way, if you recognize them for something related to a core value or something that's important to your business, you're reminding people of those things on a regular basis. And so I am a big believer in those rituals and those habits and the fact that you have to over communicate things to people if you really want it to sink in. So that's my take. What do you guys think?
Yeah,
I want to add a layer to it, and I'll give a specific example in my rugby world of a great team was also in the quarterfinals this past week. Army, we had the pleasure of going out to West Point playing, and Army we played them a couple times. They have this really funny thing, and it's very Army. Dad, you've talked about the air assault school and saying air assault every time your foot hits the ground and that kind of thing, right? Let me get your phrase right. False motivation is the key to graduation. I get that right?
There
we go. Awesome. See, I listen. But so with that, there's a very Army thing there, and especially when you're trying to get all of these people fall in line, into that unit, become a cohesive unit there. Totally makes sense. So Army scrum, Dad, you've seen them play in person. What do they do before every single scrum? Everyone there goes, Army scrum, and they push the scrum, and it's fun, and they all it helps them lock in, right? And there's this kind of funny thing there because you see that with other teams too, of the squeeze, sink, and they have these like words that they'll yell out. My coaching philosophy always was a little bit that becomes a crutch. To kind of go to the lucky socks type of thing. Well, then as soon as you don't have that, you're now going to, it's yourself fulfilling your failure, right? My thought basically was the idea that in order to really have the culture, to take that example, be lasting and have that, the individuals carrying the culture, that you need them to have that individual responsibility rather than the rah together. So it's not that each of us need to go squeeze before every scrum so that we remember to squeeze. It's that Brett and I can each go individually squeeze, and I know to do my job. And that's kind of my philosophy there a little bit. So not necessarily pushback, caveat. I'm not really sure there, Brett, but I would love to throw that back to you.
I mean, I think I see value in on both sides of that, right? So if you want to stick with coaching, John Wooden, was pretty successful at what he did at UCLA for many, many, many years. And he's sort of famous for, hey, I do my coaching at practice, and during the games, I just sort of sit politely on the bench and watch my team execute, right? Whereas alternatively, you've got, probably a good number of coaches at pretty high level literally are telling their guys every time there's a free throw, box out, box out, like this has to be reminded, like this is the most obvious basic thing. But I have to give my advice constantly. And so I don't know, Camden. I think it varies by leader. It varies by team. Yeah. But I will tell you, if you're not communicating about the things that matter most to your culture, to your business, you got to do it somehow, right? So whether you're doing it regularly at the start of every team meeting or via some mantra or cheer or you're just doing it idiosyncratically throughout one-on-one conversations or other things. What I can tell you is if you're not doing it, if you're not communicating about the things that make you, then you're not going to have that type of culture that you want. If it only exists in your mind and you're not communicating and over communicating about it, it's not going to happen.
Yeah. And I'll go back to a couple of things. One, it's the leader's personality helps set that. And what's there are leaders who are the rah guys. I can think of guys I played with, when I was playing ball, and the rah guys. Well, I was never the rah guy, whether I was playing the game or coaching the game. But I'll also flip it back over to the safety brief, and and I didn't do that many of the jumps, but when you think about what's the activity, and if it's a dangerous environment and activity that you're involved in each and every day, we in the Army, before every jump, we had to read. We weren't allowed to do it from memory. Mm-hmm. We were required to read the script about do this, do that, be here, be safe this, watch out for that, all those sort of things, because it was freaking dangerous.
Yeah.
And there are jobs out there that, that morning safety brief, it may feel like, well, here we go again, but what Micro say? Safety third?
Safety third. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's truth to that. We got to get the job done. We got to take care of the people, and we got to remember safety. In that sort of sense, it's so important. But you know what? If we're doing a daily stand up and we're writing code, I don't think we need a safety brief. You know?
I think kind of, Brett, to your point about, like each team is different, each leader is different with that. Dad, what you're talking about there makes me think of the problem that I see, and again, kind of from like my philosophy, what I was saying there was that the individual then no longer has the responsibility for the job. And so there is a necessity of the leader doing the safety briefing, doing the rah, that kind of thing there. Yeah. I guess, but again, I think kind of to your point, Brett, that's something that if you're communicating it of it, like, hey, we need you to do this, and I'm not always going to be here, so you need to remember this. It's not just a, check the 10 things when I'm here and then you skip it when I'm not. Then that kind of builds out the culture in a better way there. And I think that goes to the power of, teaching those leadership skills to the rest of the team and helping them to understand the vision, not just that we're going to yell Army Scrum every single time we have a Scrum, but why are we doing that? What is the impact we're looking for? And all those different pieces there that go along with it.
I mean, if you have a ritual, one of the easiest things that you can do to get over that hump you're talking about is hand it off to people, and just see if the leader has to show up every day and read the script and you try to hand it to somebody else and they don't want to do it. Well, then, you haven't created, people aren't valuing whatever it is that you're doing. But if you say, hey, look, who's got somebody else on the team you want to recognize this week, and people, like me, like I'm, then, okay, people are valuing this thing that we're doing or that we've created. So that would be a big piece of advice is this is not an expectation. If it's part of the culture, it shouldn't have to be the leader that gives the speech every time. Invite everybody else to lead those processes.
I'm curious about the fact in the way of there's a better lead up, but I think I just end up just fricking asking the damn question because I can't think of the fancy way to say it. Have you ever been hired by a company that just has a fucked up culture? I mean, it's like the CEO is a dick. The COO, they fight. They should have gotten a divorce 10 years ago. That sort of thing. Have you ever been hired into something like that? Hey, we're all fucked up. Brett, fix us.
I will tell you, it's very rare. So it's sort of the rich get richer in the world that I work in, because if you value culture in the first place, so let's go back to engineering. Let's talk numbers. Okay. I'm going to talk percentiles. All right. So if you're in the top 50% of healthy cultures, you probably already value it. You focus on it a little bit. And those are the organizations that know that it matters and they want it to get better. And so they reach out, they fill out our forms. They when they hear a speech, they follow up or whatever. If you're in the bottom 20 to 30%, you wouldn't be there if you knew it mattered and if you'd focused on it, systemically at all, ever. You wouldn't be in that bottom 20 or 30%. And so those are the folks that I can't talk them into caring about culture. Even, you know what I mean? They don't value it. So they're not going to pay me to do something that they don't value anyway. I will tell you the only exception to that is coaching engagements. So sometimes, you got one executive that the company knows they're a bear to deal with. Like they need to change some things. And so within their team, they have a really negative perception or there's a pocket within a company that's really in tough shape. And I do find my way into that on occasion. It's not my favorite thing to do either, but yes, once in a while. Not entire companies, though. Not entire companies.
It makes me think, what would you define as the difference, Brett, between a country, that's a whole other thing, between a company that has a fucked up culture versus one that has no culture, like a lack of culture versus something actually like bad and insidious? Because I think that if you're in it, they would almost feel similar in some ways. What are your thoughts there?
Well, so every company has a culture. That's my perspective, at least, right? So I define culture as if you close your eyes and you imagine your team next week, what are the attitudes and the behaviors that you would expect from those people when you interact with them? And that's whether it's in person or virtual or whatever. So the culture is the attitudes and behaviors that you expect from a group of people, like if I think into the future. And so it is possible for that culture to be really apathetic. And I don't know if that's what you're thinking, Camden, is like, oh, well, everybody kind of shows up, sort of does the minimum, kind of makes sort of awkward conversation, eats lunch by themselves, and eventually, goes home or something. I mean, that'd be the closest I could describe to like not having a culture.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I was picturing. Yeah.
Yeah. But, I guess when I see that, the question is, if a leader, so a leader of a team or an executive, if they don't have a sense of the culture they want, that's the important question. We can measure what it is, but the real question is, how far are you from what you want? And so if you tell me this is what I want, and then we can measure this is where it is, great. We can chart a path to start making progress. Right. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but my perspective would be, everybody's got a culture. What people often don't know is how far they are from where they'd like to be.
Yeah. No, I think that answers it well. And even just describing it as the like apathetic culture versus a lack of culture, I think that makes a lot of sense to me versus that very like negative culture there. So totally.
Yeah. But it's interesting. I mean, so we've just recently started doing more executive retreat, like strategic work, and we don't do strategic planning. That's not what I do. But what I find out is very few companies have a strategic plan for their people and their culture. They're doing something maybe, but it's not like they plan at a higher degree for other parts of their business than they do for, how are we going to help our leaders become steadily more effective? How are we going to get a little bit more aligned on the type of culture we want to have? How are we going to improve our processes such that, people think this is a better place to work? And that piece is kind of missing. And I think that relates to what you're talking about.
And that kind of dovetails into what I want to ask you is what are some trends that you've seen, both positive and negative, in that culture when they say, all right, hey, Brett, come over here. I think our culture could be better. Come over here and help us. What are some trends?
I think one sort of mega slow moving trend is that organizations do realize that culture matters more than they used to. And I'm looking like over a 30-year time horizon. I think there's been a slow realization that that sort of culture owns talent to a certain degree. There's a certain amount of the workforce that's just not going to take a crappy job, and they're not going to put up with a manager that they don't like, and they're not going to. And all of a sudden, if you don't create a healthy team and a healthy culture, right? You guys know a little thing or two about healthy teams, right? There's a big segment of the population that says, I'm not doing that, right? And that affects the opportunity for your business. So culture matters more and more organizations are realizing it. So that's sort of just a mega trend that I guess I've noticed. And that's from big businesses all the way to small businesses. I see a lot of small businesses that struggle with talent issues, as much, if not more than big companies. And all of that really relates to culture, retention and all those things are heavily related to culture. So I don't know. That's probably not what you're looking for, Otis, but that's a mega trend I see. I don't know. I'm not sure if I have an immediate trend, like a hot trend to give you.
Yeah, I agree with you. We have definitely gone from the employees or a commodity business world to, people matter for most businesses that are sustainable and successful. Yeah, I mean, you were close, but really what I was looking at is, is it ping pong tables and kegerator type things? That's always been my joke when I talk about culture. I mean, is there some sort of thing like that you've seen in your data set of doing this?
Well, the data shows that the perks are not terribly important, right? So it's certainly not kegerators and ping pong tables. Now, those can be nice from a recruiting perspective or other things. But what most of my clients that have those in their office, they don't get used. I mean, they like, it's cool for a little while, and then it's like, hey, we're here to get stuff done. And, there are some companies that really do make good use of napping pods and, beer fridges and stuff, but it's pretty minimal, honestly. And so I can tell you, I'm trying to start a trend. I don't know if that's interesting. I'll tell you a trend we're trying to start.
Yes, go.
I think I told you earlier, culture is the attitudes and behaviors that people come to expect from one another. So if you want to have a better culture, you have to be able to first envision what you'd love to see. How do you want people to show up? Have a clear picture, and then do something to influence it. Okay. To help people show up with more of those attitudes and behaviors. And I call that building a healthier culture from the bottom up instead of the top down, right? So top down would be, we're going to teach leadership skills and we're going to teach things that leaders then have to take to create teams. But bottom up culture building says, let's get right at the ideal attitudes and behaviors that would make both employees successful and happy and also teams healthy. And we've been on a journey the last few years of building a product and building a sort of a philosophy around what it takes to build culture from the bottom up. So if that's interesting, I certainly would love to talk to you about that.
Yeah, it is, because I've had clients over the years, when, on the one-on-one side of things that I've done coaching, where they go, so how do I change the culture, Otis? Well, I say, well, you got to stand up and uphold your values in front of all of them, and be willing to draw the line when it's crossed.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd love to hear what you're talking about in that bottom up culture change.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're just in the middle of, this is the number one thing we're doing with our business right now, is we're trying to help people understand what it looks like to build culture from the bottom up and to build tools to help. And so the underlying concept is, know what a star employee looks like, know those attitudes and behaviors, and then try to help people see it's in their interest and in the team's interest to do more of those things. And so probably 3 or 4 years ago, we started on a journey at BetterCulture of saying, what would it look like to build culture from the bottom up? And we went to all our best clients. We looked through research studies, and we said, could we build like a universal list of core values? That's like the anatomy of a star team member, somebody'd say, I'd love to have that person on my team because of not their knowledge base, but how they show up to work every day, that right. their team skills, their soft skills. And that was a bigger project than we expected. We started with probably 100 core values and 100 different things we'd seen work and things that sounded great. And we started winnowing them down. And by the time we got in the neighborhood of about 20 that we had boiled it down to, we kept finding parallel research that said, okay, we're sure if people do this, it's healthy for teams and healthy for culture. The thing that surprised us was we kept finding parallel research that said, if someone will do one of these things, and one of them is let's say, assume positive intent. Okay. Easy. And that's a great core value in any business. If you have people that assume that their employees, when they left them off an email, didn't do it on purpose because they secretly hate them, they just said, oh, I'm sure they forgot, like assume positive intent. It's so helpful on a team. Well, there's corresponding data for all these things that we ended up getting 20 of them that say, if people will learn to do these things, forget the team, forget the company. It's just good for them. Like, they will be more happy and successful if they master these skills, And so we ended up coming up with what we could now call our 20 tenets of culture. And half the time I speak about these, I call them the 20 tenets of culture. The other half I talk about them, I call them the 20 tenets of success, because it's both. They're good for cultures and they're good for teams.
I love that. Yeah. And I like the idea of like attacking those building blocks and the behaviors, because then you get the cultural shift that you're talking about there. It's like, we always joke about we're a family here. It's a family. It's like, well, okay, number one piece of being a family is taking care of each other. So instead of going, hey, we're a family, everybody, it's, hey, take care of the person next to you, you take care of that, and you start doing that, and then all of a sudden we're going to feel like a family. I mean, it makes a lot of sense there. And that gets into one of the questions I think is really interesting, talking about trends. There's this interesting thing where as we talk more about culture, one thing will happen, which is more leaders are getting bought into culture and the importance of culture, like you're saying, Brett. But then also it spreads outside of our leadership bubble, of the CEO bubble, and it starts to get out to everyone else. And other people get to read books about culture now, and they get to listen to podcasts like this. And they might be just the janitor, the employee that is now hearing these conversations about culture, which then I think kind of skews the way that they may view culture. And what I mean by that is people hearing these conversations can hear all this kind of stuff, and now they are out looking for it. And it's like, okay, hey, Brett's talking about how all these things are really good. How can I tell as an employee, maybe a job applicant or something, that I'm getting a real culture and something that is genuine and they're actually bought in on all these things that we're talking about, versus somebody who read Brett's book and go, ooh, I can get 25% more productivity if I do this. Okay, we're going to do that. Yeah, well, we're family. Oh, we're definitely family over here. That kind of a weird, those bad actors really is the best way to put it. Let me rephrase all that into a quicker question. What's your advice to somebody, a job applicant looking at a culture like that, trying to tell if it's genuine or not?
Try to talk to people that work there. I mean, you can go to Glassdoor, you can, etc. But, when it comes to culture, a lot of companies, I think of it as two big umbrellas. One is a marketing exercise, right? It's your employer brand, right? It's, well, can we come up with great core values, and can we have awesome colors and great photos and make it look awesome, and, and write good job ads. And like, that's really your employer brand. And that's often managed by your marketing team. And that's what gives people sometimes a false impression. I mean, the best companies have external brands and internal cultures that perfectly match, right? Mm-hmm. Now, your marketing team and your recruiting team, they're always going to be incentivized to sell a little bit, maybe overpromise a little, and that's okay if there's a little overpromising. So that's just natural. But if it's way out of whack, that's when people are being disingenuous and they're just saying things to try to get people in the door. And I honestly, as an applicant, I don't know how to get around that. I mean, you can look at Glassdoor, but the best advice is, find 2 or 3 people that work there and try to talk to them. And, so, I mean, there's not a perfect way to know as an employee coming into a business, hey, is my boss really going to be, this way? You'll find out.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well, I think kind of to my point of, it's like, well, they could read the book, they understand these concepts now. Even just going, it's like, hey, some of this is just marketing, some of this is a little bit of lip service, and that's how it goes. Even the good businesses have that, but knowing, okay, I got to look past that a little bit. Got to turn it around, read the nutrition facts. Those kind
real
of
culture comes first, and then the marketing stuff comes second, right? And so, if you get any sense that it's the other way around, I would run from that type of a company.
Oh yeah, and you're spot on. Because that's what I teach my soon-to-be veterans that I coach as they're transitioning. And, I use the phrase of 1,000 cups of coffee. It is that you got to talk to a dude that's working there, and you probably ought to talk to 2 or 3 of them to get a true perspective, because you know what? Bob may hate it, but Sam, Joe, Fred, and all them love it. So that is spot on.
Yep. Yeah, and Bob probably has hated every job he's ever had. Like there are those people too that just think, well, a job is always terrible, and wait a minute, So
yeah,
that's an interesting thing, and I think that's something to put on the mantle and work to change, because I've talked with people about that individually in the culture aspect of, dude, if you hate it, then why are you doing it?
Right.
Would y'all call that, is that fall into that mechanism of learned helplessness in a bit? Like you had so many crappy bosses that you assume they're all crappy, and you just kind of go, oh, that's just how it is, and you never break that pattern? Or what are your thoughts there? I know we're very pontificating right now, but Brett, I'll throw it to you.
Yeah, well, let me play psychologist. I mean, my dad is a psychologist, so let me try.
There we go.
But my perception is there's some people that have grown up with influences in their life that say, work is bad. Like a company is always the man, and you always have to fight against that, and it must be antagonistic between somewhere that you choose to work and who's your boss and your employer. And that is not true. It does not have to be that way. But some people have that perspective of just thinking like, well, it's my job as an employee to just look out for me and not do anything that they can't make me do. And I mean, this is not a recipe for mental health, for success, for career advancement. It's not good for anything, candidly. And so, but I do think many times when people have that perspective, it's because they hang around with people that have that perspective, whether that's their family or their friends, etc.
Oh yeah. Like energy attracts, right? Negativity becomes just spreads throughout it. And I love that. That thought, and I'm snickering to myself because went to the dentist yesterday and had my oral hygienist, Miss Dorota, Polish woman. All I could think of, she is not grandma age, but all I could think of is just her little things that she kept saying about, oh, too many tools, too much light, too much, and that sort of thing. I thought of, Oma. It's the grandma that's kind of had that sort of thing, and then you throw in the Polish accent, and it was like, oh man, it's like a bad joke. But there was nothing negative about it. It was just that sort of funny thing of too much this and not enough of that, and sort of thing. So I think that's just awesome. And I'll also say, while I'm rambling on, looking for that great segue into what I learned today, but I don't have it today, so it's just going to be a shift in the fact that. Sometimes you just got to call it like it is, folks.
The king of segues misses every now and then.
Yeah. I love the fact that you're focusing on the bottom up culture. It's what just popped into my mind is power of the people. But if you're going to stay in a job that right now has a bad culture, but you really like maybe the purpose of it, but the culture or something's not quite right.
Yeah.
Why not work to change it? Right.
Yeah.
The bottom up. Why not?
Yeah.
I mean, you'll make an impact. There's no doubt in my mind that impact will happen. So that's what I learned. Camden,
I like
how about you?
I mean, that transition. Sorry, go ahead, Camden. Is that a kick to you?
If you got a comment on that, please.
Well, I want to come back to that because you may not have had the perfect transition, but that helps me out. So, yeah.
No, for me, I think it's a couple of really simple ones to hit them quick. Brett, you said it, it's having your company culture as a thank God it's Monday, not thank God it's Friday. I love that. So such a simple way of putting it. And then also just thinking about like culture and some of these leadership tools that can be used negatively, thinking about them as like marketing and branding. I feel like that, I don't know why, that just completely clicks for me. And it's really a nice way to separate those two of the genuine culture, the well-intentioned leadership versus the lip service and those kind of things. So I really like that.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Brett, how about you, man? What'd you learn?
What did I learn today? Well, before we got on, I learned a little bit about what did you say? Is it
post pounder,
right? I learned a little bit about that. Man, I learned that there are in every tribe, in all parts of professional life, even personal life, that there are a lot of people like you guys that understand the value of teams, right? And that are working on it every day to help make progress. And I just think that's awesome. So related to what you said, Otis, you were talking about how could somebody make a difference? For anybody that's made it this far in the podcast, I mean, I right now I'm working on those 20 tenets that we've created. We have a culture Kickstarter pack that's two of those 20. Every single resource we've created, we're trying to give away for free to let people grab onto something that they can actually use with their team if they want to be the person who's pushing for change, who's trying to make things better. And I'd love to give that away for free to anybody who's stuck with us on your podcast.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, which sets me up for, how do folks find out about that? And just as importantly, contact you and learn more about what y'all got going on.
Yeah. Well, the best way to get a hold of me, you can look up Brett Hoogeveen on LinkedIn if you want. You can find me there. But BetterCulture.com, we've got a great URL. It's BetterCulture.com. Just go check that out. We have a lot of resources, whether you're interested in something related to executive strategy on culture, culture surveys, leadership training, or this bottom-up culture building. But even more importantly for your folks, I've had my team create a custom URL, which is just BetterCulture.com/10, like the number 10x your team. So 10x your team. So BetterCulture.com/10x your team. And you'll get access to that free culture Kickstarter kit where you can download and use all of the tools that we've built for 20 tenants, which includes things like self-assessment videos that people can, like, you can play with your team and you can actually have people watch a video and say, how good are we all at that, right? There's coaching video content. There's discussion guides. There's even some activities and things you can do with your team to make progress on these things that matter, not just for teams, but for people.
Awesome. Brett, thank you so much for doing that and sharing that with our followers. And thank you for your time today. Great having you.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. You guys are awesome.
Camden, run us out.
All right. Thank you all for listening to today's episode of 10X Your Team with Cam and Otis. And a special thanks to our guest, Brett Hoogeveen, for joining us today. Remember, I don't think I got that quite right. That's all right. But remember, you can watch full episodes of the show on YouTube at 10X Your Team. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure to pass along to other lifelong learners in your tribe so they can enjoy it too. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. As always, the full archive of episodes available at www.10xyourteam.net. Thanks again, and we'll see y'all next time.